This is Awareness Explorers.
Welcome back, Awareness Explorers, to Awareness Explorers. I'm your co-host, Jonathan Robinson, and with my friend and co-host,
Brian Tom O'Connor.
And as often happens, we have a guest today that I'm excited to ask lots of questions of. Let me tell you a little bit about Scott Flynn. Scott is established in the non-dual teachings of Advaita Vedanta, and his work focuses on making the often abstract path of self-realization clear, visual, and accessible. Through detailed graphics, guided meditations, and exercises, Scott points sincere seekers to the source of happiness. Since 2021, Scott has shared this understanding through books, videos, private talks, and group dialogues. He's the author of Love, Outpouring, and The Intimacy of Being, an interactive guide to self-realization. And his website is scott-flynn, FLYNN.com. Well, welcome to Awareness Explorer, Scott.
Thank you for having me.
So, one of the places we often begin is how'd you come to make this your life work and life path? What's the story behind that?
Yeah, when I reflect back, I'm not supposed to be sitting in this chair and knowing this knowledge. It seems that there's two reasons why somebody would come into the message of non-duality, and that would either be through just curiosity to understand the truth, the nature of reality, and the other one, which is most typical, is suffering.
That was my path, and you came with mine.
Yeah, me too.
And I'm going to third that. So it 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 happened back in 2006. So I was a builder in the 2008 housing crash. But as a builder, the crash happened 2 years prior to that. That's when we started to lose money, and not a little money, a lot of money. And I didn't understand that. I I I my fabric of understanding didn't get how these physical things could be worth X amount one day and then a year or two later be worth half that. I I never that didn't align with me. And what happened in that is it ripped my fabric of understanding on how things are supposed to be.
Mhm.
And that put me into a tailspin down into this deep, dark, hopeless place that I never imagined could exist. And yet I was experiencing it. And now knowing what I know is we would label that as the dark night of the soul, right? But at the time I had no spiritual background. Now I
Mhm.
was a nice guy. My businesses were all aligned to be beneficial to everything that we touched. So I was a good, nice person, but that doesn't mean I was spiritual. And to dig myself out of this hole, I went on this, what turned out to be a 15-year quest to be happy again.
Hmm.
And I tried everything. It's just my nature to like better myself and my surroundings. So I went on this journey. I became a seeker. I didn't even know I was a seeker until I came across the concept. I'm like, oh my gosh, this is who I am. I'm a seeker right now.
Mhm.
And I tried everything from um, different meditations, talk therapy, yogas, pharmaceuticals, psychedelics. I tried it all. And they all do work temporarily. It's like we can all agree on that, but they seem to wear off, and then you're off on the next search for the next thing that might make you happy. And about 10 years into the 15-year search, an acquaintance at the time, who's now a really close friend, sat a non-duality book in my lap, and he just said, I think you might be interested in this. And little did I know that that book would set me on a new course in my life that I never dreamt of, that was even here, that this knowledge was even available. And what was so profound about it is this book was a little teeny book. It was 60 pages, one-sided. And I read it and I'm like, what is this? I had no idea what it was trying to say, but something inside of me said, whatever it is, you need to learn more. And that just put me off on this, set me off on this journey. And I was a devourer. I devoured as many books as I could because I had no idea what this was. The book was a Neo-Advaita book. Again, had no idea what that even meant. Had no idea that there was a real form of Advaita. And so it just, the devouring, the reading, the watching, the listening, it just evolved and evolved and evolved, what I would say closer and closer and closer to the truth.
Something I find interesting about what you said already, Scott, is first of all, it sounds exactly like Brian's path. I think Brian could say the exact same words. It was almost
Yeah,
funny.
that's right. It did seem like I was talking to myself when you were talking.
I thought
Yeah.
maybe you had read Brian's description and were just repeating
Uh,
it. But you said that you did all these things, psychedelics, meditations, all these things that had temporary effect, but your exposure to non-duality is a different thing. It made me think that the reason for that is that non-duality is like, it doesn't need any support. That's actually what is. So
yes.
when you touch what is, well, it's always there. It now is always there. You don't have to do psychedelics to find now. You don't have to do talk therapy to find now. And therefore, it has a slightly different effect potentially on people because of it's the grounded being. Would you agree with that?
Yes, but when you're as spiritually bankrupt as I was, there is a massive bridging that has to happen there, right? Because it doesn't take too long before you encounter the the biggest roadblock that puts you back on your heels, which is you aren't who you think you are.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And that was like, well, what does this mean? I'm this guy who is a builder and does, outdoor activities and has what else is there? Like if I got rid of all of that, who would I be?
Mhm.
And that there is a sense of fear in that. There it spooks you, or it can. Um, that you have to stay curious. You have to see what this means. So, I mean, you got to keep pulling back the curtain and just peeking and going, what's that? What's that? Is this true? Is that true? Who's saying this? Where is this coming from? All of these insight that you have, these gazillions of questions that need to be answered for you to gain more and more trust in the message. And that can take years depending on where you're starting from.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the letting go of one's previous identity. A lot of people talk about that as being fearful. I always felt it like being getting out of a tight shoe. So it didn't bring the fear. But I did a lot of psychedelics, so maybe I was, primed to, oh, thank God I can let go of this Jonathan character who,
Yeah.
somewhat of a burden. But you're right that a lot of people do have a very hard time extracting themselves from their identity. And it sounds like that was part of your path.
Well, we're so ingrained. I mean, the fabric of our of of the Western society, we'll just blanket it as that, is that you are an individual who's responsible for your life. Like that is the fabric of our understanding. To even question that is absurd. And that's
Mm.
what this message is. It questions that, just that underlying, like, you never even went there, to like even discuss it. It's like touching a wound almost. You're just like, that's the foundation of everything in my life, in everybody's life. What else is there if there isn't an individual who's responsible for this?
I was
And so
wondering if, oh, go ahead.
I was just going to say, so bridging, like, it's all about courage and curiosity to see what that even means, because you're questioning what you would most likely consider reality.
Right. And when you're questioning, you're doing self-inquiry, right? You're asking, who am I, or what experience is this, etc. Was that part of your path?
Eventually, yes,
Ah,
it does come to that. I like to break it into two main phases.
hmm
The first phase is just the curiosity and the understanding and the learning of, like, what is this knowledge?
hmm
What gives it its viability? Um, and then again, just the longing to know the truth. And so again, it's more like a conceptual understanding phase where you're gaining trust in the message. And what's cool about gaining trust in the message of non-duality is that you are actually you're stepping out of your false identity as you're learning. And that is the trust. Like, the trust is this direct experience of, like, okay, I'm all in. Like, I'm here. What's the next step, so to speak? And then if you're lucky enough to come into self-inquiry, and asking yourself questions such as, who am I, or who is this I that thinks? That's what bridges you from, we could say, phase one into phase two. And it's in that bridging that I see as, it's the most courageous act anybody can do in this life, because you're surrendering into the unknown of I am, of thisness, as Jonathan says, of what is, and that can't be known with your mind, right?
And
So that the relinquishing is letting go of your mind and dropping into your heart.
hmm
so I read on your website, that you feel, and I agree, that most people fail to really embody that realization. Why do you see that most people uh, don't go very far into non-duality?
Because we've never been shown the value of ourself.
Hmm.
There is no, at least in my upbringing, all the way up to 10 years ago, nowhere in my life, in education or religion or sports or music or community, this message was absolutely absent.
That's a really interesting point. I never really thought about that. Like we get, I think something like 1,500 advertisements a day now, we're exposed to some ridiculous amount. And none of them, zero out of 1,500 every single day, are about the value of one's actual self.
That's
You
right.
never seen a song about it. You never hear a movie about it, an advertisement about it. There's no one whose interest is let's promote uh pure awareness, and that has an effect because we are getting exposed to everything else with all our desires, saying how great that is, but there's nothing greater than your experience of your own self.
Yeah. And it's building value around that. It's showing that self has value. And, you have to approach it in a completely different way that we learn anything else and
Yeah.
describe anything else. So really it's if you're lucky enough to come into this message is going to show you that self, this experience of yourself that your mind can't know, has tremendous value. In fact, it's the only value there is. It's the only substance there is that we're experiencing right now. And what makes it profound is that when we turn our mind to try to understand and conceptualize self, what happens is our mind is finite and it's trying to get its limited arms around the infinite
Mm.
to know it and put a label on it. And when it can't do that, when it fails, it says, therefore, that doesn't have any value, so ignore it. If I can't know it, it doesn't have value.
Mhm.
And so that's where, things like guided meditation help understand what that means to turn our attention inside and actually analyze the experience of self and put words around it that demonstrates its value.
Right. And when you talk about self, of course, you're talking about self with a capital S, because one of the problems I think people have told me that they don't like self-inquiry because when they ask, who am I, they get completely involved in the personality, in the ego, in the self-definition. But you're talking about the self to which all of that appears,
That's
right?
right. Yes.
How would you best define that? Or I suppose it's impossible to use words to define it, as you said, but how do you help people
So,
there?
yeah, this is where like diagrams and hand gestures really come into play. So I like to visualize it like this. Like this is a funnel. And the I, the individual me, the sense of me sits here. And it looks out into this world, okay, this funnel that we'll call it. And everything that it knows is in this funnel. Everything it knows with its mind, its body, its five senses, everything that it thinks it owns, all of its identities, all of its talents and traits, everything. There's nothing outside of this to the individual. But, and so what we do is we go on this trek in our life to look outward to find happiness and peace. And some of us realize that it's futile, right? Even the self-help is in here.
Mhm.
Again, it's an outward looking motion if we want to look at it like that. What non-duality says is just let everything be as it is. Let everything in this funnel be as it is, what it is, and just love it for what it is, unconditionally. And all we're going to do, instead of turning our attention into this world, we're going to turn it back onto the one that's having this experience of all of its ownership and all of its experiences. So now we've moved away from the complexity, the oodles and oodles of experiences and possibilities, and all we're going to focus on is the one that's having them. So we've simplified it. We've just collapsed complexity into simplicity. And when we turn our attention back onto the sense of individual, what happens is the more and more we do that, we start to see through its illusion that there isn't anything solid there, which would be the small self. Okay. It collapses into the infinite self or the capital S self. In Advaita terms, what happens is that as the ego collapses, what remains is self, is the infinite self. And this is where again, some more like pushback or on your heels because people are like, well, what do you mean my mind? Like I'm letting go of my mind. Like that's a big deal. And again, yes, it is. It does appear to be a big deal. But because it's non-duality, we acknowledge this. We acknowledge it's a big deal. What is happening is that as we are acknowledging or experiencing this finite mind, it collapses into the infinite mind of awareness. So it collapses into nothing but mind, the infinite mind.
Hmm.
And
Yeah, that's a
so there is mind. It's just not the mind that we think is the mind.
Right. It's like who is like if we think that the mind is words running through our head, who is that? Who are those words talking to? What is knowing that? And then have you found that this is something that I found a lot of people talk about how you have to destroy thought or stop thinking or get rid of thought. I found that once I realized that thought is just an appearance in the true I or the infinite self, that I didn't have to worry about it anymore. Was that your experience at all?
What becomes apparent is that the ego will morph into anything it can to stay alive.
Hmm.
And the paradox is it wants to stay alive, but it also longs to go home and rest in the love of itself. So what we're doing is we're reminding it that it would rather come home to the permanence of peace and happiness relative to staying out in the temporary world that never satisfies. And
Mhm.
so it's this morphing, like when you get prior to it, like what you're saying, like the knowing, what knows this, you can start to see like when it shape shifts into anything, like the one that wants to get rid of itself. Now it's the I that wants to rid itself. That's just another identity. Even things like the one that wants to be happy. I'm seeking happiness. I want to be happy. That is now a new identity of somebody who is seeking happiness. And so you start to see its identities and its shape shifting, and we could say that's the start of understanding of true self-knowledge.
Yeah, it seems like ego can be infinitely flexible and subtle, and our tendency to create identities can get more and more subtle that kind of, once again, keep us from the true self for any length of time. And so it's a continuous process of letting go. Um, I'm curious, I'm somewhat of a collector of methods, and so is Brian. Um, and I've found that different methods work for different people to let go of these identities. Uh, and I'm wondering what you found particularly helpful or are finding helpful in your continuing path.
Well, we have to acknowledge that self-knowledge does not have any sort of mechanism or method, because if it did, then we could build one for everybody and then everybody could be at peace today,
Mhm.
right? But it doesn't mean that we can't try to describe something. And so one of the simplest, if we go back to this really quick, we're all we're doing is we're worried about the I. We just want to know the sense of me, the sense of individualism. And we want to dissolve that into the infiniteness of ourself. But if we also go back to realizing that the ego will shapeshift into anything, so therefore it will never have the ability to rid itself ever.
Mhm.
And so if you want to look at it like I like to say it's like the letter P. The letter P has a leg to it, and then it has a loop to it. Okay. So this ego rises. That's the leg part. That's it coming into existence. So it has to rise into existence before it can do anything. And
Mhm.
so if the ego rises into existence and then tries to come back and rid itself, it can't, because it doesn't get to the root of the problem, because at first it has to come into existence to do something. And so
Mhm.
this becomes an infinite loop. Okay. And we could say that even this new identity might help for a while. It's just another thing that we learn, like therapy or taking pharmaceuticals or anything else. It's a new identity and it might feel good for a while, but then it will just come back. So what this does, it's saying it's not about ridding the ego, it's about reminding the ego of its true nature. So this P, instead of coming back, the P turns into a horseshoe and it rests in itself. And that's self-inquiry, that's self-investigation.
Mhm.
Atma Vichara is what it's known as. The investigation of understanding what it means to stop trying to fix itself and start trying to remember itself. Again, we're going back to super simplicity. All this message is saying is that if you want to truly know yourself, all you have to do is rest in and as yourself. Self-abidance. That's it. And what happens is self, we could say, choose at the root of ego, from the root out, and it dissolves the ego. So self knowledge, self abidance, dissolves the ego from the root out. It does this. And we experience that. These are experiences from self abiding, which is the direct experience of peace.
Mhm.
That's how you know if you're abiding or not.
Well, I get the theory of what you're talking about, but I'm not clear on how somebody would do a practice that would help them to experience that. For example, Brian, I took this thing called the Finder's Course, and they had an interesting method there, which was very powerful, where people would get together in groups and they would just try to describe with words what awareness was. Awareness is the input of all my senses with no filter, or whatever they would say. And you do that for long enough, and you get a kind of an experience because you keep pointing to something which is our true nature. And I'm wondering, there's self-inquiry, who am I? There's different meditations. What, if any, practice do you find is or has been useful for the people you work with and for yourself?
I'm going to give another visual example that we can all do, even if you can't see this, my visualization, but I'm going to put my hand out. Okay, this is an open palm. This is us as a baby and a child. Okay, somewhere between 4 and 6. We're just this free floating being. And somewhere between 4 and 6, our parents and grandparents and our brothers and sisters say, "You're cute, you're a boy or a girl, right? You got curly hair or not." And what happens is we start turning our attention away from ourselves onto what we think is a boy or a girl or cute or dimples and any of that. And we start to become somebody. That becoming is this free floating palm contracting. And this contraction is the sense of individual. It's the sense of me. And as we age through our teens, through our coaches and teachers and clergy and anybody else in our life telling us who we think we are, this free floating palm turns into a contracted, hardcore fist. And this is me. This is who I am. And so this is a person. And this person now runs around the world looking for this. Okay? But the more it tries, the more this tension, and we can feel this tension. There is tension in here. So the work has been done, so to speak. In self-inquiry, when we turn our attention back within, it is literally breaking this, this ball of energy and tension and loosening it back up. Now, there's no new effort here. This is an effortlessness of going from contraction to non-contraction. This is a relinquishing of energy. Okay? It's a complete opposite of what we've been trained to how things get done. We've been trained that we have to put energy in to achieve an outcome. Well, this is going back into like Wu Wei. It's effortless action in which something new is experienced. So in self-inquiry, we're letting go. We're literally letting go of the felt sense, the contracted sense that thinks it's in this body and mind. We are letting that go and learning what that means, because again, it's new. And that's the investigation. What does that mean? Because again, it's a big deal because you're letting who you think is in here go, and you're starting to realize that I am is not inside or outside. It's everywhere and nowhere. It's everything and no thing. And that's who I am.
Mhm. And it's already here, and it's already what you are. And so, how much effort is needed to be what you already are?
That's right.
And asking, well, can I let go of effort?
Yeah. And again, we don't want to deny the severity of what that seems, because who am I if I let go of all of my identities, all of my apparent traits and talents? Who am I going to be? Am I going to be willing and able to get out of bed and go to work and make a living and raise my family? I mean, all these questions start to come up.
Mhm.
And what's realized is that the more you let go of these identities, the closer they get. It's another paradox that's experienced.
Mhm.
What do you mean by
And
that? The closer they get as you lose this identity. Can you flesh
yeah,
that out a bit?
so an egoic identity is a mental concept. So I'm an engineer, or I'm a father, or I'm a homeowner. These are all thoughts of what I think that even means. But when you dissect that, it just falls apart. There's no concept that can get it clearly. So when you let those concepts go, you become the experience of those concepts. Everything comes closer.
Hmm.
When your mind collapses, everything is here and now.
Yeah, there's no filter.
There's no filter. Yes. And so you want to be more intimate with your wife or your kids or your friends, or you want to come closer to your talents and skills. Know yourself.
I was listening to a tape of Adyashanti the other day, and he said something similar that normally, like when you're with your wife, you're with your concept of your wife, or with the name of your wife, or the history of your wife, which is very different than being with the being in front of you that's there right
Yeah,
then without a filter.
that's right. Yes. Yeah, there just is what is, and in that is this unity with your
Mhm.
partner and unity with everything. that's that's what's so beautiful about it, is there's no distinguishing between who gets more of your attention or not.
Mhm.
Everything is loved unconditionally for what it is.
Yeah.
That's complete removal of filter.
Mhm. I was curious about something you mentioned just now about your skills and talents, because some people feel that this self-inquiry or non-duality is that anything having to do with the personality, the individual is totally rejected. But I found the opposite to be true. When I stopped trying to fix the personality, there was a freedom for the talents and skills to be expressed, and the realization that the true nature, the infinite universal self loves the individual.
Yeah. Yes. You came back in line with reality as it was manifesting, and it's manifesting all of these talents, and we could say personalities, the characteristics, probably a better way to make
Uh-huh.
sure we're not going back into person or personality, but the characteristics that makes this unique, makes Brian unique, makes Jonathan, it's just coming through us. Nobody's doing that, right? And to your point, when it's realized nobody's doing that, there's just total freedom because that's what's happening. And
Mhm.
we can even apply science to this. I mean, this is science has proven this, that there's we make decisions and stuff in the back of our brain, and 6 to 8 seconds later it moves to the front where the ego says, I did that. So ego is the original afterthought
It's
that
always
takes
taking
credit.
credit for something it didn't do.
That's right. And when you come home to yourself, you could visualize it as this 6 to 8 seconds is now becoming 4 seconds, 3 seconds, 2 seconds, one, and you're living from here as it's manifesting.
Mhm.
And
Yeah,
that's peace, that's freedom.
yeah.
And
Well
when you
said.
said, sorry, Jonathan, when you said ego is the afterthought, it reminded me that we sometimes have a hard time figuring out what ego actually is. For me, when I realized it's only thought, it's
Mhm.
not a thing.
Yeah.
It's only thinking that freed up a lot.
Yes,
How
if
would you
we
define
dive
it?
into Advaita deeper, I mean, you're touching right on the core of it, right? The ego is the thought. It's when you come to every morning, the first thought, you don't even know you have it, is the thought, I am this body. That's the ego I. That's the I thought. If we want to start to use some sages out of India, that's the I thought. That's the original thought. And all other thoughts are based off of this one thought. Again, apply it to here. This is the thought, I am this body. And then all the other thinking and everything else we know is based off that one thought. So if we can eliminate that one thought, it collapses.
And
So,
the second thought seems to be, I am this body, and there's something to do to make things better.
yeah,
And
yeah.
that keeps us pretty busy. You put those two thoughts together and you have a human life summarized.
It, it, yes, and the reason why it's on this track is because it's a fragment of the whole. So it's
Mhm.
looking for wholeness,
Yeah.
but it's looking in the wrong direction.
Right.
All it needs to do is go from out here into the fragmented world of impermanence back to the wholeness and permanence of itself.
I read on your website that you were a chemical engineer at one time and also into construction. How would you say those experiences influence how you look at all this? Is that part of your unique view of non-duality?
Well, the construction is what brought me here, the collapse of the industry. But the engineering is where I'm most likely getting the mechanics of reality, like I'm bringing that into a visual form,
Yeah, yeah.
right? That's if I have a special skill in non-duality, that's it. It's being able to diagram and animate what we're talking about here so that the reader or the listener can help bridge that gap even faster.
Hmm.
Because when you do turn within, you have these aha moments of like, you could say, oh, I just experienced what that diagram is trying to represent. And once you have more and more of these, you're like, this is the answer. And
Yeah.
what's the answer? Self-abidance.
Mhm. And you
That's
do
it.
explain it awfully well in your book, Love Outpouring. And by the way, that's one of those books that I started highlighting, and I highlighted so much I was wondering if I was highlighting the whole book.
Oh, wow.
But you do explain things very clearly in that, and that's very helpful. But getting back to your personal experience, one thing you did mention in that book was that there was a random day in the summer of 2020 when you were watching just another random non-duality video. You said it was from a Rupert Spira presentation, and that's when you directly experienced the message as it presented itself to me, as you said in the book. I was wondering if
Yeah.
you could talk a little bit more about that experience.
It goes back to perseverance, right? If you persevere in this message, eventually you'll hear it described in a way that aligns with your alignment somehow, and it'll take you right to yourself. And you can have these, these split second aha moments, and you're like, oh, it's it's right here. I am is it. And what happens is you're so excited that you take your mind there to try and get it. And of course, your mind can't. And so the thing vanishes. But at least you had that spark. Well, that's what Rupert did in, it was a video. So that I had to be a video because I didn't start going to some of his retreats until a couple years later. But that was it. Yeah, I touched in it and just was like, it's right here. It's the being, it's the isness of it is what's being pointed to. And then you could say you go on even a harder journey searching because now you really want it. You want more of it. You want that to last more and more. And at the time I didn't even know what self-inquiry was. Um, it wasn't until I came into Michael James' teachings, who is a descendant of Ramana Maharshi, is where the real impact started. So again, I would say that my journey just got me closer and closer and closer and closer and closer. And the last message, the last thing I needed to hear, which took 7 years, was the only way that you're ever going to know the truth of yourself and experience yourself more and more is you have to turn within. That's what Michael was saying. That's what Ramana Maharshi is saying. And it took me listening to Michael James for about 6 months at least before I heard what he was saying over and over again. Turn within, turn within, turn within. You will never know the truth until you turn within. And so I did. I collapsed. I surrendered because I'd had enough. I was miserable.
Yeah.
And I was like, this is it. This is the answer. I know it. I know it enough conceptually and I know it enough inherently. But I want to live it. I want it to be who I am because it is who we are.
Well said. Well, I'm wondering if you could guide us in a meditation that might help us and our listeners to get that experientially.
Yes, it'd be wonderful. Allow yourself to be as you are, regardless of what's going through your mind or what you're experiencing with your body. Just let it be that without trying to change it in any way. Say to yourself, I am, and ponder the experience of I am, meaning turn your attention to the experience of I am and analyze its qualities. For I am is the recognition of your existence. When you say I am, you are literally saying I exist. Notice how obvious the experience of I am is. Notice how real it is. Notice how intimate and close the experience of I am is. And yet, for the life of you, you could never describe it in words. It's a descriptionless experience. And yet, it is absolutely real. How much effort does it take to know I am? Absolutely none. It is effortless. I am is the experience of effortlessness. How complicated is the experience of I am? How complex is it? It has absolutely no complexity. It is absolute simplicity. Does the experience of I am have any fright? Is it fearful to know I am? No. In fact, it's the complete opposite. Experiencing yourself, experiencing I am, is the experience of peace and contentment. It's the experience of the peace and love of yourself. Notice that you did not have to consult your mind to know I am. For I am is the direct experience. It's immediate. It needs no consulting to know. Notice that you did not second guess your experience of I am. It's inherent, innate knowledge. Recognize that you do not have to believe I am. In fact, you don't have to believe anything to know I am. Notice that you don't have to learn anything. There's no additional knowledge to know yourself. Recognize that you do not have to follow anybody. You don't have to attend anything. And you don't have to join anything to experience I am. I am is obligationless. It needs nothing other than itself to know itself. I am does not have to leave itself to go learn about itself somewhere else and bring that knowledge back to itself to know itself. It just knows itself by being itself. Do everything in your power through your day-to-day life and the rest of your life to turn your attention onto the experience of I am. For I am is the salvation you seek. I am is what you've been searching for your entire life. I am is who you are. And who you are is unconditional love and acceptance. Turn your attention back to I am and never, ever turn it away. Namaste.
Well, thank you for that.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
I always love watching Brian during these meditations. He looks so blissed out. It's great.
Yeah. I mean, I just find that just being that I am is, well, its nature is happiness itself.
Yeah. And it expresses itself with the smile. So Brian's smile and Jonathan's been smiling too. That is it expressing itself. That means that you are resting there or close to it, close enough for it to say, aha, you're on to it. Just keep going back there.
Yeah, I'm so glad you mentioned that because I've always used that as kind of a North Star, you
Yeah.
know, this kind of happiness for no reason, unrelated to circumstances,
It's
uncaused.
causeless. Yeah, causeless peace.
Yep.
Yeah.
And that's the evidence. People are like, how do you know you're getting closer? How do you know you're on the right track? Well, your life just becomes more and more peaceful. That's it.
Mhm.
And you're like, well, I don't do, yeah, you don't do peace. Nobody does peace.
Mhm.
It just shines. That's the shining. That's what shines through you. And that's not a thing. That's emptiness, we could say, shining through. You've emptied yourself of your egoic self, and in that emptying, the piece of yourself shines through in and onto the world.
Yeah.
Now, although you said words can't describe it, you've done a good job of describing it both in the meditation and in your presentation, Scott. So I appreciate your way of describing these things. What's the best way people get hold of you? Through your website?
Yes, that would be the way.
And that's Scott-Flynn, FLYNN.com.
Yes.
If people want to support us, they can do that through patreon.com/awareness explorers, where we send you a bunch of extra stuff each month if you support us on Patreon. Any last words, Scott or Brian?
I'm so happy that we got back to basics
Yeah.
with this. I really think it's so helpful, and I'm really looking forward to sharing this with our listeners.
Yeah, and I would just encourage your listeners to just get curious and see if this is true or not. And you will find that it is the truth. You're heading towards the truth, and the truth is yourself. It might seem unbelievable at first. Let it be unbelievable, because it is. It's unbelievable to this.
Yeah.
But the more you pull back the curtains.
Fortunately, it's always there, so you never have to go very far, just turning around.
That's right.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Scott, and thank you, our listeners, for continuing to listen and support us. And as always, we want you to keep exploring.
Keep exploring.
Thank you for listening to Awareness Explorers. To learn more, you can check out our website at awarenessexplorers.com. Please subscribe to our podcast on your favorite podcast app. We'd love it if you would post a review. And please share our link with family and friends, because knowing yourself as awareness is the greatest gift you can give yourself or someone you love.